This closing quiz, there are a couple of questions on there that may not have been in your book, so I'll give you those answers. They're not on your exam here, but they would be probably just good things to know, just in general. So we're looking at the closing chapter quiz out of Unit 12. And we'll go over the rest of the packet on Wednesday. I just wanted to just kind of revisit closing to make sure we're good. So number 1, on a closing of the sale, the seller must in every case, what did you put? How about B-boy? Deliver the deed to the grantee. Now, I got distracted with that too, but couldn't a loan be assumed and it wouldn't be paid off? So, but the deed does have to be delivered. Regulation C, now this one I don't believe you found in your book. So 2, the answer is B-boy, but it's just not a really good question either. So just for your knowledge, they do have a little bit of a rescission on financing, and what that means is it usually holds up in refinancing loans. If you go to the bank to refinance a loan, they give you a 3-day right to cancel the refinance, but that wasn't really brought up in your lecture, so I wouldn't worry about that question. Number 3, though, the primary purpose of truth in lending is what? C. Now, everyone, when it says disclose the cost and conditions of the installment purchase, they aren't talking about an installment land contract. Anytime you get a loan, aren't you making installment payments? So it's an installment purchase no matter what. Number 4, all of the following are requirements of RESPA except A. The lender's going to look at, well, when are we closing and how much do we need to put into the reserve? And so it could be as much as a whole year of taxes or insurance. It could be as little as 2 months. The thing about it is, RESPA says, lender, you can't have too much in there. In other words, you can have what you need plus a 2 months cushion if you want to have a cushion. But there's not a rule saying you got to have 3 months or you got to have 4 months. There's not a rule on how much they have to have. There is a rule on you can't have too much though. Number 5, on a closing statement, the earnest money deposit is C. Credit buyer. Number 8, which of the following is the closing agent's responsibility? I misread this one because I just saw agent, and it's not the agent, it's the attorney is who they're talking about, or the paralegal who oversees the closing. And so what did you put? D. Disperse all funds according to the agreement of the parties. The agreement of the parties, everybody, is the offer to purchase. And so it really, really, really will be good for you to read over the offer to purchase before your final exam. And number 8, this wasn't in your reading, but I would remember this one just on the in case. 7. 7. What's 7? D-dog. A seller would be responsible. Seller doesn't prepare the mortgage and the note. This is an accept question. Everybody good on D-dog? 8, the answer is C, 2 years. The lenders keep their closing information for 2 years. How many years do we keep ours? 3. Number 9, man owns a rental apartment building. He sells the building. How would the tenant's security deposit be reflected on the closing statement?
D is not.
No, it is. It would be A. It would be A. Credit by,
The rent?
no, excuse me. The answer to 9 is, it would be C. What number are we on? A man owns the building, it would be debit the man, credit the woman. 9 is C.
Because he's already paid that month's rent.
No, it's not rent, it's security deposit.
Yeah.
Guys,
He just had it paid to him.
But he said, but For the tenants,
All right, now, let me just say, let me give you my piece for a minute. Somebody who owns rental property, there are a couple of ways this can be handled, but the intention of this question is C. The man owns this rental property, and he's got security deposits in a trust account, right?
Yes.
That money will not be prorated, but if you buy that property, don't you want the security deposits? Because the leases go with the sale. The sale will not end those leases, and so it should be just a dollar for dollar exchange to the new purchaser. So the security deposit should come out of the man's account, and it goes into the new buyer's account. And so when it's handled that way, the trust account, the man can go and just get that money out after the closing because he gave the money to the new owner. Let me show you where it would be. Hold on just a minute. Go with me to page 607 in your book. And then I'll hear what you have to say. Go with me to 607 and look at the bottom, summary of double entry. Tenant security deposit is transferred or assigned. Debit the seller, credit the buyer. Now here's the other way it could be handled. The owner of the property, the seller, could release that security deposit back to the renter. And then when the new buyer takes over the property, they could go collect the security deposit and then they have it. Guys, I think that's a little risky, to be honest with you. You get the security deposit back to the renter, and then you say, but the new owner's going to come get it again. Why not just bypass that and say, here's the money, and now you've got it. Now, the new purchaser would have to notify the buyer where that money is located, what bank it's in, where it's located. Now, what do you want to say?
we want to say that we want the tape turned back because
What were you told?
I swear we were told it is not in the closing document.
And so how would it be handled?
It was handled outside the closing between trust account to trust account.
Because you can't, because
All numbers need to show up on the closing.
I'm just saying.
Well, rewind it and hear me roar. It's a double entry. It would be debit out of the seller's account, credit into the buyer's account. Now, everything could be negotiated, I reckon, but guys, that's the best way for keeping up with the numbers. When you go to a closing, all the numbers need to show up on the closing document. And so that would be a double entry, debit seller, credit buyer. Okay, that's gonna be the answer, best answer. Chris does need a spanking.
I got a question.
Now, let me give him the benefit of the doubt. He is in this property management business, and buyers and sellers can agree to other things, but we also know that RESPA says all numbers need to show up on the closing statement. Best answer is what I just gave you though.
What does that assign mean, like in the, on 607, it said tenant security deposit?
Assign means transferred over.
Oh, that's it?
So it just means it's a dollar for dollar exchange. Just transfer it over out of my account to your account. Guys, it makes sense that way. I mean, Chris was saying it outside closing, but guys, it's part of the closing. It needs to be documented on the closing paperwork. The only way I've seen it done is what I said, where the seller gives back the deposit to the renter because he doesn't own the property anymore. And then the new buyer comes and says, now, we're gonna collect the security deposit because we want it to go into the bank where our trust account is. I just think that would be awkward. Getting it again, it just seems like why not just transfer it from one to the other? All righty, what's number 10? All of the following items are usually prorated except
C.
C, appraising. All righty. read you something, just for fun. Have you ever wanted to know what success is? Let me tell you what success is. At age 4, success is not piddling your pants. At age 12, success is having friends. At age 17, success is having a driver's license. At age 35, success is having money. At age 50, success is having money. At age 70, success is having a driver's license. This is not dying, and having a driver's license. At age 75, success is having friends. At age 80, success is not piddling your pants. Guys, life goes around like that. I'm beginning to see it. It's kind of scary, but that's true.
Piddling your pants, is that what you're saying?
Take that off, take that off. No, I'm not saying
Happens to the
that.
best of us, lots of times, but it's a laughable experience.
It's a laughable experience. All right, let's go to Unit 17, and let's talk about some appraising for a minute or two. And I am on page 472. And I want your comments, your feedback on this unit. Having read the unit, getting yourself prepared for the lecture, what is your impression of Unit 17? Real property valuation. Easy, hard, boring, interesting?
I think some parts of it's kind of easy, but there's definitely some.
Some parts are easy, like what?
Like I think the, as far as the sales comparison approach, I think is pretty easy.
Mhm.
I can't remember.
Cost approach, income approach?
Yeah, then I think some of the different approaches are kind of complicated.
Okay, I hear you, and that's gonna be level 3 math. When we do the sales comparison approach, when we do the cost approach, when we do the income approach, those are math questions, and you will have them, and that is level 3. So that's more analyzing and understanding the information. Overall, though, what about the terms and just terminology and what's going on here, the appraisal process? Did it feel pretty straightforward? I hope it did. This unit, in my opinion, but I've been teaching it a long time, the unit, in my opinion, is pretty straightforward. The math does get involved, but I think after we talk about it a little bit, it'll make some sense to you. But guys, I would just remember some terminology and not complicate it. You don't have to overthink a unit that has terminology. You know, understanding what the definition of an appraisal is. You know, understanding what an appraiser does. You know, that's, I hope, straightforward. Some of the math does get a little more involved, but I think that we can make it easier for you. So what Demarius is talking about is, do you plus or do you minus on that comparable sale? And I'm going to show you that, and I think we can make it easy. Well, let's look then, page 473. This beginning introduction section is level 1, so let's treat it that way. But very important point, I would know the definition of an appraisal. Do real estate brokers do appraisals? No. So when you're doing what we are going to call a CMA, or the Real Estate Commission says broker price opinion, could be used interchangeably. They mean about the same. When you and I are doing a CMA, we are not looking for value. We are looking for probable selling price is what you and I are looking for. Appraisers are the ones that look for value. Is everybody good on that? So if you see a question, they're asking about a broker and asking what you do, and it says find the value, you know, do an appraisal. We don't do those things. You are expected to know how to do a CMA. Later in this unit, it talks about a CMA being a client level service, and the commission will hold you accountable for not doing one in a competent manner. So it is something that you're supposed to be doing for a client. Now, most of us are pretty easy, or most of us understand pretty easily that sellers would be the client. If someone calls you and says, come out and look at my house, I'm thinking about putting it on the market. So if you're doing a CMA, that would be appropriate for them. That would be part of a level of service for a potential client. If you have a buyer and you talked about the Working with Real Estate Agents brochure and they said, I don't want to be represented, then you're saying back to them, I hope, some way or another, well, then you understand that I'm going to represent the seller then, because we are an agency state and we have to represent one or the other or both. So if the buyer is a customer, you do not do a CMA. If that buyer says, I want to be a client, then you do a CMA. What does that mean? If the buyer wants to be a client and I'm saying you would do a CMA, what does that mean? You're going to do a market analysis for the buyer client to help him decide, or her decide, what to make on the offer. Now, it seems a little bit like an oxymoron to me. Now, here, you may not have thought about this. If we're all supposed to be competent as brokers to do CMAs, and we're supposed to do a CMA for a client, well, that means that the listings that are out there on the market, the listing agent should have done a CMA, right? Well, then why are you doing a CMA for the buyer then? If you're an exclusive buyer agent, you can do it. If you're in dual agency, you can't, because you're neutral like that. But yes, I beg your pardon, you can do it if you're in neutral, because let me rewind that. If you're in dual agency, then the buyer is a client, right? And the seller is a client. You can either say, seller, can we show the CMA to the buyer because it's in-house? If the seller says no, you can do a CMA for that buyer client, even if you're in dual, because it's a client level service. And what were we talking about?
Well, it's the seller who determines the price, not the agent or the comp value.
True? Explain a little bit.
So.
That's true. Those are true statements.
So the selling price that is listed, or the request.
List price.
List price, thank you. Right, is determined by the seller of the home. So you need to help your buyer client understand, is that decided price, within market value or not?
Excellent. Guys, you and I do go out and give the CMA to the seller client, but they don't have to list it for what we show them the houses are selling for. When we do a CMA, you're showing them probably where the house will sell. It's their decision on what to list it for. Now, it probably is mentioned in this unit maybe at least once or twice that you really don't need to be taking overpriced listings. So your job is to advise that seller client that's way too much out of the price range, or maybe it's a little bit over. So it would be up to you as to whether you want to take the listing or not. But having an overpriced listing does not help your client, and we're not supposed to put ourselves in the equation, but it ain't going to help you either, because the property won't sell if it's overpriced. Do y'all believe that?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever thought about this, or maybe even watching some TV shows? Because here's what you hear in the real estate business, real life. Guys, this is a real life chapter. This unit here is what you're going to have to understand to be in the real estate business. So you should be getting some value out of this unit also, because it's going to be experience. I mean, you'll see it in your business. I've heard owners say, well, we want to try higher because we can always come down. Right? Or we want to try higher. Somebody can make us an offer. We'll negotiate. Now, both of those statements are understandable, but both of those statements are bad statements from a real estate agent hearing it. Yes, you can price it higher, But who's gonna show it if it's overpriced? Nobody will show it unless, I can tell you one time, if your price is over, if the property that you list is overpriced, but there are houses in the neighborhood, they have competition. If you are showing houses in this one neighborhood and you see a house that you know your buyer ought to buy, but you see another one that's over this price, you might show that one to your buyer to get them to buy the one that is priced right. Does that make sense? So that would be a statement to say to the seller, we can know, you can price it what you want to, but I'm here to advise you. And if you price it too high, either it won't be shown, or if it is shown, agents are showing it to a buyer for the buyer to choose which is a better deal. And if there's one for competing property on the market, most buyers choose, if they're about the same, the lesser price, don't they? I mean, that's real life right there. By the way, the seller does choose the price. You don't, but you're supposed to be competent enough to do the CMA, and so you're the expert in the field. And if you go out and say, well, the range is between 135 and 150, and they say, but I want 175, I wouldn't list that property. Guys, if you list it, they expect you to go to work for that, don't they? And that's not helping them. You're supposed to be an agency, aren't you? I want to tell you a real life story happened to me. We do want listings because that's how the phone rings. That's the inventory. You want your sign out there. You want the phone to ring, and it goes into MLS, and all the other brokers out there have access to it. And at the very least, it could be a co-broker sale, another firm. I went out to interview for a listing. I always tried to get listings. To me, I like that part of the job. And so I went out to interview this owner about getting the listing and looked at the property. And back in the day, we used to do the two-step. It's not a dance, it's a process. This two-step was gather the information, go back to work up your numbers, and make an appointment to make the presentation. Now everything's so fast-paced, you can work it all up on your laptop and talk to them in the same meeting, but we used to do that two-step. So I went back out to present my CMA to the owner. And I presented it, and I forget the range, but it was, we can pretend 135 to 150. And I said somewhere in this range, and I felt really good about it. I felt like this is really a good CMA. The owner objected. The owner said, no way. I'm not listing it for that. I want like 169 or 175. It was a fair amount over. And I started trying to sell this owner again on, you need to price it right. I feel really good about these numbers. This really is where we need to be trying to put your property. And then here's where I made my mistake. I said, but if you want to try it at your price, we can try it for a little while and see if what the market will do. And here's what he said. I didn't respond. I was younger back then, and I didn't respond. I'm going to respond today the way I would have responded if I knew. He said, how can you list it for this price when you think it's overpriced? You don't think it's worth this price, so how are you going to sell it for me if you don't think it's worth it? And I didn't get the listing. What I want to say now is, touche, you're right. I don't think it's worth that price. His point was, if you don't think it's worth that, how hard are you going to work for me to get that? Does that make sense? I didn't get the listing. And I really don't believe anymore, let's just list it and see what happens, because time is so critical. If you list it right, you got to list it right, everybody. That saying, if we list it high, we can always reduce it. Well, then you lost your market. Those first 30 days are critical. Just visualize, if you will, all the buyers out there waiting. What's coming on the market new? We're waiting to see what's new. We want to get there first and get it before somebody else does. First 30 days, absolutely critical. After that, if it's priced right, it should sell pretty soon, shouldn't it? And in this market, it should sell pretty fast in a certain price point. And so trying it for a little while overpriced, you've lost a lot of valuable marketing time. And so I probably would be cautious how I would have a talk with my seller today. I would talk to him about that first 30 days. It's critical, and you can't go back. Yeah, you can reduce, but then if the house doesn't sell right away, now you're reducing, and someone asked in the day class, doesn't that begin to look bad? It does. I've seen houses on the market, seller reduces it $5,000. Next week, they reduce it $5,000. Next week, $5,000, and they're gonna end up selling the property lower than what they probably could have gotten if they would have priced it right at the beginning. And it does give that impression of what's wrong with it, or they're getting desperate. And then that harms that seller. So it is a little bit of a fine science where you do the research and you present it to the owner and say, here's what the market is telling us. Yeah, you want more, I want more for my house too, but we gotta look at what people are paying. What people pay predicts what people will pay. So there's a story and I'm sticking to it. Let's look at the VIP paragraph. An appraisal is an estimate or an opinion of value. I'm on the top of 473. An appraisal is, because having definitions is important, an estimate or an opinion of value by an appraiser on a specific date and a specific property. Top of 473. I would write in my margin that an appraisal is not a determination. An appraisal is not a determination of value. It's an opinion, it's an estimate, but it is not a determination. Who determines the value? Buyer and seller, the market. The appraiser doesn't determine the value, the market does. Everyone, does it make sense that the appraiser verifies the value on behalf of the lender? The lender is an investor, everybody. The lender is lending a whole lot of money to the consumer borrower. And the lender wants to make sure that the collateral they're lending on is worth it. So they will contact an appraiser to go out and verify what the buyer and seller agreed to is verifiable. Is that the market value? Oftentimes, and I would even say most times, the appraiser comes back with exactly the price that the buyer and seller agreed to on the sales price. And I've heard students say, I just think that's weird. It's coming back exactly what we paid for it. Well, guys, they're not out there reinventing the wheel. The market, the buyer and seller agreed to that. They're going out to support and verify that on behalf of the lender. So they're just verifying, is that the value? So let me show you where I can show you that reading, so you don't think I just made it up. If you'll hold your place and go to page 478. And if you read down at in practice on 478, take a moment and look at that. So it's not a determination. Let's go back to where we were on page 473, and let's just talk a minute about appraising as a business. To go into appraising, you would take a course similar to this, a basic appraising course. The appraisers also have to come back and take different levels of education, similar to your post-licensing courses. And then appraisers take continuing ed also. One thing that is really different about being an appraiser at the beginning versus being a provisional broker. If you go into appraising, you would affiliate with what they call a lead appraiser, a head appraiser, the lead appraiser. You would be called an apprentice, and you would have to be under that lead appraiser's supervision until you accumulate enough appraisals. They call them points. Until you get, I've heard 200 or 300 points, so that you can kind of leave, not be underneath that umbrella of that lead appraiser.
I think typically it's 1,000 to 1,100 hours.
1,000 to 1,100 hours.
That's what I've read.
Yeah, so that could be a lot of appraisals, couldn't
I'm
it?
looking at that also.
Yeah. If you want to go into appraising, an appraising company won't hire a whole lot of new appraisers because the lead appraiser literally oversees everything that the apprentice does and signs off on the work. So literally they're supervising. Now you might be thinking about the BIC and the PB. The BIC is supposed to supervise and they're responsible for PBs too, aren't they? It doesn't seem to be quite the same. If you go to work for a real estate company, that company might have hired 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 new agents at one time. That BIC does not, I don't want it to sound negative, but they don't sign off on your work. They're there for you if you need them. They're there responsible for training you and all that. But you do go out and get listings and sign your name on behalf of the company. You go out and make sales and you sign your name on behalf of the company. Now the BIC is going to probably have a safety net, somebody who looks over the contracts after you've gotten a listing or after a sales contract. It's just handled differently at the appraisal level. It just seems like it's way more hands-on, it appears. So appraisers don't hire, I would be surprised if they hired 2 at a time, to be honest with you. They get the apprentice, and when that apprentice has their time in or their number of appraisals that they've worked on, well then they don't have to be under that direct supervision like that under the appraisal. Let's look at informal estimates we call a CMA. This is level 1 here, everybody, on 473. A real estate broker is expected to know how to do a comparative market analysis, or CMA for short. Also, commission says that we could use the terminology broker price opinion interchangeably with CMA. But I can tell you, real estate agents who've been in the field for a while see that just a little bit differently, but basically it's the same. You can use the term interchangeably, but let me just give you an example. Back in the day, if a bank called a real estate agent up, like BB&T would call Jason up and say, Jason, we want you to do a BPO for us. In other words, here is the address, ride by, fill out this form, and send it back to us, and we'll pay you $100. That would be a BPO. A CMA is what you and I do when we go meet sellers to put their house on the market. When we have a buyer client and we're trying to help them decide on what to offer on the price. Basically, it's the same. The BPO feels a little more informal, and it's usually a third party calling you up. For example, when we had the financial crisis, lenders would call brokers up instead of calling appraisers. Lenders would call a broker up and say, would you do us a BPO and we'll pay you $100, instead of them calling an appraiser and paying $400. Guys, there was a little bit of a combative issue during this financial crisis. What happened in, what they say, 07, 08, 09, right in that time frame, the market was crashing some, and the real estate agents who said, this is my business, I want to survive this market, they had to find a way to adapt to stay in the business. One of my students, when we were talking about this years ago in continuing ed, one of my students says, Jan, so the commission is telling us we can't do these anymore because the appraisal board says your brokers are acting like appraisers without an appraisal license. And what it's doing is taking away business from the appraisers. So you can see that's a legitimate complaint. Real estate brokers were doing it to survive the real estate crash. And one of my students, I remember seeing him saying this. He says, so Jan, what am I going to do? I made $30,000 last year doing BPOs. And they're telling me I can't do them now. So how am I going to feed my family? The market's bad. I'm trying to adapt. And so there were a lot of unhappy real estate brokers when the commission came out and said, you all may not do BPOs anymore because the appraisal board has brought it to our attention and they've had to talk about it, and you're acting like an appraiser without a license. And so that's kind of the basis of that in the financial crisis. Now, they had one little exception to that, unless this person is a possible client. Now, I know that we could fudge, and we could say, well, BB&T might be a client, but a potential client is you're going to get the listing, right? And if BB&T calls you to do a BPO, they're just looking at it, should we foreclose, or what are we going to do on this? They're probably not thinking about listing it. And so I'm not saying that there's a little fudging going on, but we could say, well, I might could get it. But the appraisal board and the real estate commission kind of had this discussion. Brokers don't need to be doing this. Well, that was in 2007 or 8. And then a year or two later, the commission and the appraisal board had another chat. And then we came to our continuing ed classes and we said to the brokers, you may do BPOs and you may be paid for it unless you're on provisional broker status. You may not be paid to do a BPO. So we can do BPOs now. So if BB&T calls you up and says, will you do us a broker price opinion? Ride by, here's the address, here's the form we want you to fill in. We'll pay you $100. You can do that as a non-provisional broker. As a provisional broker, you may not do that. Now, here's my little thing. I would say, if my BIC would let me, if I were on provisional status and I get a call personally from somebody I know at BB&T and they say, Jan, we would like for you to do us a BPO and we'll pay you $100. If I'm on provisional status, I would say, and if my BIC is okay with it, I cannot take the pay, I'll do it for free. I would do that. Why do you think I would do that? Experience, and this is a potential source of business, isn't it? Why would I want to turn down that opportunity? They might be calling me back later. Who knows where this could lead? It's a contact. And if my BIC will allow me, I will do it for free. And then I'm going to work on getting rid of my provisional status so they can keep calling me and I can have a little extra income. By the way, any earnings that brokers make run through the company. So if BB&T says, I want to pay you $100 to do it, guys, it goes to my company. They take their part, I get my part. So all money's run through the firm and then it comes down to you. Depends on the company policy on how that would be handled. They might say, you take the whole thing. Same thing with referrals. If you send a referral out to another broker in another city or state, the referral fee comes to your firm, they get their split, and then you get yours. So it would depend on company policy on how that would be handled. But you can do a BPO now and get paid for it if you're non-provisional. But we're not going to use the words value because we're not appraisers. We're looking for probable selling price. Go with me now to page 474 and let's talk about some definitions. And the first one is value. So when they say value is an abstract word, what does that mean? Value is abstract. People, Angel said people perceive it differently. value to one person might not be the same value to another person. But I would highlight the last part of that paragraph, and it says here, value may be described as the present worth of future benefits. Does everybody see the last part of that paragraph, value? Present worth of future benefits arising from the ownership of real property. Present worth, what I'm willing to pay to get the future benefits. What are the future benefits that I want?
Resale value.
Resale, like appreciation. Remember, real estate is a long-term investment typically. If you hold it long enough, the value should go up. So I'm buying that income-producing or profit-making product. What else would be the benefit, future benefits? We talked about this maybe the first day we were together. What about tax deduction? What about real property tax deduction? What about interest deduction if you have a loan? Those are benefits, aren't they? Every year. You can borrow against your equity. We talked about a home equity line of credit, didn't we? So lots of things. You know, one good benefit, I think, if you think that you could be a landlord for a little while, you know, the renter's paying, you could argue the renter's buying the house for you, right? If they're paying you rent that covers your mortgage, it's kind of like somebody else is buying this house for me. Now, it's not that easy, of course, because there'll be repairs and there'll be costs associated with it. But if you can get somebody to pay a good rent and get that property paid off, that would be good. I want you to look at the 4 characteristics. DUST would be the acronym. I think that you guys understand this without us spending much time on it. Doesn't supply and demand affect the value? So demand and supply. Utility has to do with usefulness and does it satisfy your needs? You know, is this something that the person really wants and will they be satisfied? And then transferability. Is there value on this property? Does it transfer easily? Now, we talked about this in Unit 2 when we talked about life estates. Didn't we say it would be hard to put a value on hard to do a CMA on a property that someone has a life estate on it? How can you figure out what somebody's willing to pay for a property if they lose it when somebody dies? And so I don't think personally that's easily transferable. I don't know how you would quantify the value on that. Do you all? I mean, I think that would be hard to do. But anyway, does it transfer relatively easily with clear title? Market value, look at the top of 475. First bullet point is probably a good one to remember. Market value is the most probable price the property will bring. This is probably what it will bring based on what similar properties have brought. So we're going to learn about looking at the market and what have buyers paid for properties that look like this or similar to this, because it will predict what buyers will pay for property today. Look at bullet 4. A reasonable length of time must be allowed for the property to be exposed to the open market. What is a reasonable length of time?
So maybe they release the property on the market for the day, at a certain day, like no one has like exclusivity to see it beforehand, it's all open at the same time. So if someone's like, hey, this house is gonna come on the market in 3 days,
Right.
no one before that can see it, so once it comes on in 3 days, that's equal amount of time?
Well, I mean, that's a fair statement. You do see signs when you ride around. Have you seen signs that say coming soon? I've seen that on some listings, haven't you? That's a little, well, the proper word's not controversial, but it's a little bit weird in a way, isn't it? Coming soon. Now, when that sign's on there, coming soon, it can't be shown during that time, because that would be an unfair advantage for the listing agent, wouldn't it? coming soon. Nobody can show it until, like Hunter said, it comes on the market. I can tell you just for a little bit from my experience, I can remember listing a property and getting an offer the very next day, full price. Taking the offer to the owner, and the owner says this, well, it hadn't been on the market very long. How do we know we couldn't make more? And turn that video camera off. You just would go, what? Are you crazy? That's the fair market value because buyers are out there looking and somebody didn't want somebody else to get it and they're willing to pay the full price. I do get it from that perspective though, don't you? If it sells so fast, I guess the human reaction is, we're not leaving money on the table, are we? And it really, you have to really kind of keep your cool about it because this is what the market is worth. And I don't know if you've ever heard anybody say the first offer is usually the best offer, because I have heard people turn down those offers and then the house sits and then they regret they didn't take it because it came too fast. Guys, if it's priced right, buyers will recognize it, won't they? I can't say this in class, but that happens. And it's almost like, I always felt like, if I read between the lines, what are they saying to me between the lines? Or you didn't work for your commission. It feels that way, doesn't it? Now, I get it, I really do get it, but if somebody's willing to make a full price offer just like that, they're afraid somebody else is going to get it. Doesn't that make sense? I think so. Let's look at market value versus market price. We said that market value is an opinion based on what other properties have sold for. Market price is the sales price, everybody. Market value is probably what it will bring or should bring. Market price is what it brings. So just say market price is sales price. And then when we talk about the cost, guys, cost represents the past. What did it cost? So sometimes in a math question, and we'll look at this later, you might be asked the question, if the house is worth this much today and it has some profit in it, what did it originally cost? So they're asking you what in past tense did it cost. And I just want to remind you, and I think that we've talked about this before, didn't we do... I might not have shown you any of that math, but it seems like I showed you that. And it seems like I remember telling you, no matter what the cost is, it's 100% of itself. So if you don't know what something cost, you can say, I know it's 100% of whatever it was. Does that make sense? In other words, let me just carry this out. What if the sales price is $100,000? You know that. And what if there's a 25% profit? You know that. And the question is, what's the cost? Think about this for a minute. That $100,000 sales price, doesn't it have more than the cost in it? Doesn't it have profit in it? 100,000's got profit and cost in it. So does it make sense to you that there's more than 100% in that number? It's 125%. Does that make sense? In this number is the cost, which is 100% of itself, and the 25% profit. So put this in your calculator. Divide that by 125%. 100,000 divided by 125%. 80. So we can say, well, the cost is 80,000. Because if you said 80,000 plus in your calculator 25%, you get the 100, don't you? So the 80,000 is the 100% and the 25% would be the 20,000. So the sales price has the cost in it, which was the past, which represented 100% of itself. We'll look at more of this when we get into the capital gains taxation unit. I think that's unit 18 or 19. We'll talk more about that. Look with me on page 475, the forces and factors that influence value. We talked about this in unit 1, I believe. We talked about social forces. We talked about economic and political and physical, didn't we? So all of these will have a bearing on the value. Why would trends in an area, social forces have a bearing on value? Why would it matter what the trends are? If there are lots of single people or divorced people or lots of families, what would that have a bearing on real estate value?
Because a single guy doesn't want to try to date people 4 hours away. He wants to be close to his source of dating.
Source of
Thank you for the source of dating, huh?
Source of
Married
dating.
people don't want to be near a bunch of single people, you know, it's a nice little thing.
And a single person probably isn't gonna spend what a family with children would spend, would they? So if you've got an area like Greensboro, it's more of a family town. Charlotte and Raleigh might be more, you might see more of a single lifestyle there. Don't you think the prices in real estate are gonna be different? Don't you think the types of real estate will be different too? Around here, you know, the most common property you see in Greensboro, one of the most common is a two-story. You know, two-story houses are relatively cheaper to build rather than a one-level ranch style, and so families can afford that. So it might set the trend on what the values are, what kind of construction. Economic forces like unemployment or the employment rate, taxation, politics. Guys, politics, I don't know. Tell me what you think. We've got a midterm election coming up in November. I don't know that that would affect real estate. What do you think? The midterm? I sort of don't think that would affect real estate that much, but I think a presidential election does. Do y'all?
Maybe back in the day, but like today, a Republican, Democrat, everybody can live beside each other because we never see each other. We're too busy in phones and social media. We go in the house, out the house. But back in the day when everybody knew whose kid was who,
It was
that was probably
different.
a factor.
It still plays a factor, you can see that with the auctions.
What now?
It still plays a factor when it's a presidential election, because people, you know, they don't know who's gonna do what, and what's gonna happen with the economy, and we see a big difference when it's.
I think in a presidential year, maybe not, well, I think you do, because people are wanting to know, well, is it gonna be a Republican instead of a Democrat, and what are they gonna do? Is it gonna be a Democrat instead of a Republican? What are they gonna do to the economy? Some people literally say, I wanna wait and see what happens before I buy. And some people might say, I wanna buy now before it happens. Right? Because they're thinking something's going to happen, and so that would matter. And physical forces, the location, the topography. Think about areas like Arizona, Nevada, Florida used to be, well, somebody here might know more than I do. Florida used to be the place for retirees, and I'm not so sure that it is the place anymore because of all the hurricanes that have been happening over the last years, and it's expensive now, you know, and to live there. Guys, North Carolina is a great retirement state. You know, people who want to retire in North Carolina because of mountains and beach. And then think about it, if you've got grown children, those who live east, up north, and those that live down in the south, you're quick halfway there. Halfway there.
Florida's property value has dropped 15% in the last 6 months
Wow.
because of the Lake Okeechobee and the Hershey factory and all the red tide.
Oh, wow.
My grandfather lives down there in Naples.
And so the property values have dropped
Dropped.
because of that, of the red tide. Wow. And the
He
red
works-
tide
he does
is,
part-time, him and a guy, they put out beach chairs and umbrellas and charge you by the day. And surprisingly, he makes as much money as I do.
wow.
Out of putting 50 to 60 chairs and umbrellas out, they bring in $1,200, $1,500 a day. And they have to pay the county, or pay the city taxes on their profits and all that, because he has a license to do that. But yeah, this, the red tide, the hotel occupancy, there's hotels that's been shut down for months,
Wow.
resorts, everything.
What's the red tide? It's about some kind of
It's
fish?
an algae.
Algae?
If you look it up, it's I mean, it's the most disgusting thing that you can see. It's literally like a green blob.
It's like slime water.
Yeah,
So-
there've
oh, it
been
is?
millions and millions of fish, manta rays, you see them lay on the beaches dead,
Mhm.
walking down like Inglewood Beach, which is one of like the more nicer ones.
Mhm.
It's nothing to see, just, I mean, thousands and thousands of fish. Snapper, drums, I mean, big fish,
Wow.
mahis, everything.
Why do they call it the red tide? Tide?
It's just,
I thought it would be red, but it's not.
Green tide doesn't sound appealing, I guess.
Oh, okay.
yeah.
It says, come on in.
It sounds, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
look it up, because it's a big thing, because it's all political stuff, because Lake Okeechobee, they have let a lot of the chemicals and stuff out, which Okeechobee goes to each side of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's on both sides. But the
Wow.
intercoast, or the inner side, the Gulf of Mexico got it the worst, because it doesn't have, you know, like the Gulf Stream, it doesn't have a strong current, it's kind of diluting a lot of it. But a lot of your waterways, I mean, you think, anything you think of wildlife, it's killed it.
Wow. That's not good, is it? Go with me over to page 476, and let's talk about some of these principles of value. And we're going to do it after we take our next break. It's 8:15, so why don't you take a break, and we'll come back and get to this section. And then I'm going to start talking to you about how some of the appraisal methods work.